good evening, everybody. It's Diane Young here on behalf of South Pacific Private. And while we're all logging on and settling in, I would like to acknowledge that we're here today on the land of the Gayamagal people, part of the Eora Nation. The Gayamagal are the traditional owners and custodians of this saltwater country and are part of the oldest surviving continuous culture in the world. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. So tonight we're talking about grief, understanding grief. And we've had quite an overwhelming response to this. It's fascinating, for me anyway, because I think at some form we're all struggling with grief most of the time. So, of course, the first thing people think about when they think about grief is the loss of someone they love. And we need to grieve. We need to feel the feelings associated with grief. And often it really is like someone has got if your life is a chessboard, it's like someone's got the chessboard and thrown it up in the air, and you're scrambling to find the pieces, and they're behind the lounge over there, and they're behind this, and you're stuck in the middle trying to make sense of what's a nonsensical experience that you've had. So when we're talking about grief, and I'll just quickly want to just talk about the types of losses that we experience, so that we're talking about a broad range of them. Of course, we're talking about the death of somebody. We're talking about miscarriage, perinatal loss, separation, divorce. That's very big. The loss of a pet. Retirement can be difficult for many people. It's not a goal of mine, actually, I must tell you. Redundancy, being made redundant, and immigration, particularly if it's forced upon people in terms of refugee and war. Parental bereavement, perinatal loss, infertility, suicide, bereavement, sibling loss, childhood and adolescent loss, which could be the fact that you never had a childhood, or you never actually were allowed to be just a teenager and a kid. Spousal bereavement, so the loss of a spouse, and surgical loss. So it's a broad range, and I'm sure that many of you will have, while you're listening, you'll be thinking of your own experiences of loss. And I'd be very happy for you to, pop those in the comments if you feel that you would be able to do that. So, thank you, Susie. I'm sorry to hear about your mum. And 2 weeks ago is very raw. The things that determine how we grieve, if I could talk a little bit about that, the sort of attachment style we had with the parent or the caregivers that looked after us, the loss of our history when we don't remember things, and there are types of losses that we can experience. Sudden death, sudden loss, traumatic, untimely, so it's not in the natural order of things. We'll often say, look, it's not in the natural order thing that my child dies before me. And, that can be very perplexing and distressing, of course, for many people, and anticipated. So we can actually anticipate the loss coming. It actually doesn't make it that much easier when it actually happens, interestingly enough. We think we're going to be prepared, but we're not. So we need to also, the kind of loss, I think, and I want to talk about this because we are talking about mental health really here. When we lose the spirit of who we think we are or who we thought we would be, the loss of the ability to step into the power of our life. Lot of people of the faith who lose their faith, and they can go through in a spiritual wilderness. For those people that are spiritual, they can go through a dark night of the soul. It's very difficult for those people, and our emotional awareness determines how we grieve. So we're often faced with things that we don't quite know how to handle, and I know that for a time there was a big discussion in the mental health profession about whether grief should be put in the DSM. There was a lot of feeling about that. And I don't think anyone was really trying to pathologise it. What they were trying to do was actually, well, this is what I made up anyway, they were just trying to put it out there, how significant grief is in our life. When I was loss of identity, thank you, Patricia, and Davina. My father was killed when I was 14. My sister was killed when I was 19. My mum passed away from cancer 5 years ago. My last remaining family member, who was like my mother to me, passed away last week. That's an enormous amount of loss, and I have worked with people that have had those levels of, one loss after the other, and it can feel, one loss can feel overwhelming, never mind about a whole family. So often the sorts of grief that we're talking about tonight will be long held and will actually take a long time to get through them. So I have one small story to share with you, and then I'm going to talk more about how we can try and heal through grief. And yes, that's true, David. Grief does not stop. I think we kind of grow ourselves around it, I think. That's my experience of it anyway. So I was clean and sober in recovery 15 years and decided I would have a child. Now, I was living with my husband. I had never thought I'd have a child because I hadn't done enough work on my family of origin. And when I'd done enough work on my family of origin, it seemed like I would be open to being a mother. This was massive for me. I'm talking 15 years of work to get to that point. Anyway, so I fall pregnant, all's good, I'm happy, healthy, Nick's happy, healthy, we're all good. Thea's born, she's a bonny little girl, and when she was about 5 weeks old, he was complaining about being very tired. And I said to him, go to the doctor and get checked out. You probably, just need to make sure that you're all right. Not thinking for a minute there was anything wrong. Anyway, the following week down, he went to the doctor, had the usual tests that they run, chest x-ray, and they found a spot on the lung. And very quickly they whip into action. I know nothing about any of this, right? I'm grappling with breastfeeding, man. That's enough for me. And so I take him to hospital on the Monday, and they operate him on a Tuesday, and I won't go into the story, but he died on the Friday. So all very sudden, no warning, no one expected it as far as I can tell, and so I'm left with a 7-week-old baby, a mortgage so big I couldn't jump over, and absolute shock about what I'm dealing with. Now, I didn't think that I thought for the first 5 years after that loss, and I'm looking at people who are writing, about their losses in the comments. I don't know about you, but it took me 5 years before I thought I'd survive it. And by that stage, Thea was 5 years old. And there's a lot around that story, and there's always a lot around the stories that we hold. And for a very long time in my home, I only had photos of my daughter and my late husband in the house. And then gradually I had to change that. Not that he's still there, but he's not the only one. And I think when we lose a deeply held love, in whatever form it is, whether it's somebody that it's very clean love, there's no ambivalence about it, it's tough. If you then layer on what I experience when I work with clients, is I layer on some sort of ambivalence or separation, where there's been abuse in the family and there's been no contact for a while, and then suddenly, one of the parents dies, and there's pressure put on the person. You've got to go to the funeral. No, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to do anything. You have to do what you feel is right for you. And oftentimes we will need support in those periods. Now, I know there's a couple of people listening today who work in this field at the coalface with people and families who are in the raw state of grief. And I want to thank you, particularly Patricia, for logging on tonight. And I'm only sorry that I can't actually talk to you, because I do know that when we're talking about grief, we're often talking about prolonged grief, and we're talking about grief that can become stuck because we have unresolved stuff from our history and unresolved stuff with the person concerned. Now, I'm of the belief that if we wish to, we can start to gently unfold the layers of that. But to do that, we need a skilled grief counsellor who understands that it's going to be a slow process. This is not, in my experience, like dealing with straight childhood trauma, if I can ever use that term. I don't even know why I'm saying that, where we're actually dealing very head on with it. Grief has complexity that is not like anything else. So, what I do know is, thank you. What I do know is that when I started to see a grief counsellor, because I was blown to smithereens, I didn't know what to do. One of them, fellow I went to see, the first guy I went to see was a psychiatrist. He was very heady and he wanted to talk a lot, right? Which sounds like a great idea, but you know, it's like I just was in a loop. We go into the loop, doesn't it? Yes, Julianne, it's not just about death, you're right. But what I then found, ironically, a Catholic nun who was living in a house in DY, and someone suggested I go and see her, and I went and saw her, and she said to me, I want you to write about your grief. I want you to write about how you feel and what's going on for you. Now, I was in publishing at the time, and I wrote all day, every day. So I'd pick up a pen to go to write, and of course I couldn't because I went into work mode. I went back the next week, I said, I can't write, I'm a journal, there's nothing written in it. I'm feeling like a total failure, I don't think I can manage anything. And she says to me, I say, I can't write because I'm used to writing all day for work. And she said, all right, I want you to paint it. Now, an artist I am not. For those of you that have ever seen my stick figures, you'll know I'm not an artist. Creative in many other ways in my life, but an artist I'm not. And I went straight to a art supply place, got some paints and things, and started to paint it. And it started to shift something. And it was imperceptible. Just imperceptible. Because what had happened was that I was not trying to process the grief out of here. I had been given permission by this woman who was skilled in her therapeutic way of being to process it out of here. It was more painful that way. But I was able to get in and experience it. I don't think that, there were many times I didn't think I would survive it. And I know when I'm listening to you put your comment, I'm watching your comments come through, and I will go back to them at the end of the talk. I didn't think that I would survive it. And I was looking back through some training I did with PACFA, which is my association because I'm a psychotherapist. And I did some grief work with them recently. And one of the people that was doing the presentation said, there's actual evidence that a broken heart is not just folklore. Now, I want you to listen to this. And I'm just going to read from this. It's actually a diagram she sent, and she said a new study examines, now it was only 19 patients who'd suffered cardiac problems following sudden emotional stress. The study offers a possible explanation. The first one is grief or fear is experienced. And when you think about how you feel when you're in grief, it's very close to how you feel. Well, it's very close to how I felt when I was frightened. There's a lot of fluttering going on in here. It stimulates the adrenal glands and the nerves and produces a stress hormone, including adrenaline. And that lowers the heart's pumping ability. And the reduced pumping causes chest pain and other symptoms similar to a heart attack. Now, this is not new news for those of us that work in the field. And oftentimes, thank you, Julianne. My friend has just lost her daughter and was hospitalised with broken heart syndrome. There you are. So do not think for 1 minute at any level when you're dealing with any level of grief, and I do not care what the loss is. I do not want anyone to ever say it's not that important, or it's not that big, or it's not like someone died. It does not matter. If we're talking about our attachment to our caregivers and the connection between that and the grief we experience as adults, it's serious. And we need to reach out for help, to help guide us through it. Will it make it go quicker? Probably not. But I'll tell you what won't happen is you will not do it alone. And in my world, I never want anyone to be in that level of pain on their own. When we lose people, or when people die in our life, or we lose a situation or a job or whatever it is, but let's just talk about people for a moment. When we lose people in our life, now, yes, my husband died, but when you think about it, he was, in many ways, he was like in some ways, he was like the brother I never had. He was like one of my best friends. He was the man I had fun with. So he was the social go-to guy. So it's not just, we're not linear people. We just don't, in each other's lives, we're not just one being. We play various roles when we're with people. And so we need to be able to process the grief, work through the grief, talk it through. And I mean, I know I'm going to say take care of yourself, and you don't want to get out of your pajamas or get off the lounge. I get that. And you get sick of crying and you think you'll never stop. But what I do know is that sort of releasing the emotional energy and working with it from our feelings body. And many of you know Vessel Bandicoot in his book, The Body Keeps Score. And he will often talk about the trapped, held emotion that we feel in our body. Now, it could come from childhood trauma. It could come from a trauma that's happened in our adult life. And losing someone that you love that's an integral part of your life, that's a traumatic event. So don't diminish it and don't make it smaller, because it's not. It's part of our life, and it's part of the fact that we do live on the planet. It's going to be part of our lives. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, I've got to mention her. She talked about the 5 stages of grief. I think was it 6? No, 5. And now there's people debunk it and say it's not. I don't think she ever meant, my understanding from the reading I've done is she didn't, she talked about denial, anger, bargaining, which includes guilt and shame, depression and acceptance. But it's not a linear process, I had a great image, and it said, there's this sort of bell curve, and it's got, grief here and recovery over here, and everyone's going this way. No, it's not. It's messy. And I think sometimes you can go along and feel like I'm doing really well, and then suddenly you'll walk into Coles or Woolies and stand crying in front of the tomatoes because he always used to make fabulous chicken cacciatore. Do you know what I mean? I mean, this is the sort of stuff that happens. And I can remember the McKissicks, who were the first ones that did work in the grief field, and I did some work with them years and years ago, and they talked about, you go into the room, you've got to, back in the day they'd say, clear everything out and go on a cruise. Like, hello, that's helpful, not. So now they say, wait, calm, let's go through this sequentially and see what's going on. And it's hard. You pull out, a shirt, you smell the shirt. What comes back to you? Because you're in here. All of those memories that you have with that person that was significant to you. So, I don't think Elizabeth Kubler-Ross meant that it was a sequential process. I think she just meant that they were all over the place. Well, that was my experience anyway. So, when we're talking about grief, we're talking about prolonged grief, ambiguous loss, grief where we're disenfranchised, traumatic grief, vicarious trauma and grief, anticipatory grief, and there's others. But I want to talk a little bit about recovery now because I've gone on a bit long. I'm sorry. It's a big subject. So we need to be able to be safe and express our emotions. And if it's anger, that's fine. And if it's tears, that's fine. And if it's both, that's fine. I think I would be a big advocate, based on my experience, of drawing or painting your grief. I mean, you're not going to put it in the Archibald. Maybe you do, I don't know. But, you know, it helped me enormously to do that. And I've still kept some of those. I think oftentimes when we grieve, we go back to a very young state of ourselves, a young age. So we need to put ourselves in positions where people are looking after us or being able to check on us, you know. Are you eating properly? You know, are you trying to get enough rest? It'll be very hard. I remember very clearly after Nick died, I slept on the lounge for a good while because I couldn't go to the bed. You know, I just knew I couldn't do that. It was okay with me that I slept on the lounge. I eventually went back to the bed. It's okay. So you do whatever you've got to do to get through it. And I think the sort of reinvestment with new relationships, friendships, and there will be people in your life that you will feel have let you down, I imagine. The ones that you thought that were going to step up and be with you for the whole journey, and they're not there. And you'll find that the ones that you don't expect will be the ones. I remember women in 12-step fellowship. I lived right out at Avalon at the time. They were in the city. They'd drive out with food. They wouldn't bother me because I was breastfeeding and trying to sleep and do all that stuff. And they'd leave food on the doorstep, and, you know, that was their way of trying to care for me at the time. You know, I was very grateful. So I want to particularly make a point of there is such a thing known as persistent complex grief disorder. If you feel that you're stuck in the cycle of grief, I would absolutely support you to reach out and get help. I know there have been people that have gone into South Pacific to just simply be able to experience their grief without having to worry about feeding themselves, without having to worry about doing any of that stuff. I do think it's critical as we start to come out of it, and it takes time, I'm not saying quickly, to find and make meaning in our lives again. And I know many people have had very traumatic grief experiences who've actually changed everything about their life. It's just everything's switched around. So the fellowship, thank you, Beck. You've been carried by the women in the fellowship. You have. I'm just going to have a look at some of these things. So just while I finish, before I finish, reinvesting in life, whatever that means. I had never been a gardener before I was in grief. I became a very good gardener. It helped me. I'd never painted. I paint sometimes when I'm in some sort of pain. I'll paint. I know that it was okay for me to be depressed and sad. I know that it was okay for me to say no to social events because I couldn't manage the frivolity and the joy of people because I didn't feel any joy. And it was important for me to have ritual around the fact that I'd lost someone very suddenly. And the thing I did do with my daughter, who's now 34 years old, I might tell you, is when people would come and talk about Nick, and she would listen because she never knew her dad. So she'd listen to the stories about him. And that was really important, that we talk about the people that we've lost, that have died, and that we love. Because I actually believe, and I'd be interested what you think about this, I don't think they leave us. I don't think they truly leave us. And that has been my experience anyway. So I'm going to have a look at... we have a blog on the South Pacific website I want to make mention of, which is called Understanding and Processing Grief. If you're struggling, please look at it. Kath, nice to hear from you. Lost your mum a few weeks ago. I'm sorry to hear that. After years of trauma, now physically sick. Can't stay awake. Feel no joy. My heart is broken. It's very interesting you say that. Thank you, Kath, for bringing that up, because some of the physical symptoms, this is just the physical symptoms of grief, is feeling physically sick, Difficulty sleeping is a big one. Please go easy on sleeping tablets if you are having difficulty. You feel exhausted all the time. It's heavy. It weighs heavy on you. You have poor concentration. You might actually get heart palpitations, dizziness. You'll have patchy appetite, and you might actually lose weight. So, I want to just make a point of that. Those physical symptoms are very critically part of grief. Thank you, Kath. Amy, I experienced this some years ago, 42 missions through emergency with chest pain that finally was died. Pericarditis, officer was spasm and shocking. Times only 20. Yes. Went away with time and healing from the grief and trauma. Thanks for sharing this. Amy, thank you for sharing that with us. That's shocking. Slotha yoga? Is that a typo, Patricia? I don't know, but I'm sure yoga's very good for you. Davina, I can't cry at all. Well, you'll cry when you're ready. I'm sure it's okay. You never know when grief will come and hit you in the back of the head. That's absolutely true. The only way through grief is through it. Yes, you're absolutely right. Amy, navigating grief of a loved one due to suicide. I think this is terribly difficult, particularly when there was no warning. And that terrible sense of loss that we're left with of, could I have done something? Could I have helped? If they'd spoken to me, I could have done something. And they can't. And I think this is the very, very big one to deal with. We've had quite a few suicides in 12-step recovery recently, and it's very hard for people. Better out than in, yes. Profound examples, thank you. Margaret, it's never too late to deal with grief. It took me 18 years to start to deal with the sudden death of our 5-year-old son, and 11 years to deal with the loss of our baby at 20 weeks into his pregnancy. We can recover, never lose hope. Drawing helped me too, and my husband. Thank you, Margaret, for sharing that. It's a terrible. I feel very sad reading it. Grief is lonely. It is. That's right. I slept the wrong way around in the bed for the first year, so I get that. So head at the feet and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, carried by the women in the fellowship. Becky, I know that you have done, and you've carried others, and people are very grateful to you. SPP is the safest place for grief recovery. Thank you, Patricia. Yeah, Susie, please do call tomorrow. I think you need help. If you think you need help, it's absolutely available for you, please. Don't do it on your own. God knows none of us need to be doing it on our own. Amy, I know you lost someone to suicide. I know this. I've been having moments of overwhelming mostly I've been a bit of disbelief, numbness. I think I've caught up with the stress body. Yeah. So, and I think that's a protection, isn't it? The loss is so extreme. We are numb, and I think that with your knowledge, Amy, you will get through this. And if you're numb for the moment, stay numb. I think it's a protection. Spirits eternal, they're always with us. Yes, that's very true. Waking up is a nightmare. Thank you, Carl. Grief is like an energy. It's an energy like electric current that needs outlet. Always right. Yes, Lyndall. It's an interesting point you make, Lyndall. My life has been profoundly changed. Not all bad, but I'd rather he didn't die. And I wonder about that. I mean, my daughter said to me some years ago, do you think you and Dad would have stayed together if he'd lived? And I said, well, darling, I don't know, but I would have liked to have given it a shot if I'd had a chance. We don't know these things, do we? What happens when you just feel numb, can't cry, and have to get on with it? Well, we get on with it and we try and talk about the numbness. We work with the numbness. When you work in process or somatic psychotherapy, you work with the numbness. So, thank you, Patricia. Stay in your PJs. I agree with that. Davina, 7 months sober. Hubby's back in rehab, so dealing with the grief of my nan. Marriage falling apart, having children to look after and work. Davina, you will be given the strength to get through this. God knows why you're in the middle of it. But I think that there's... we never know what's coming around the corner. Somebody once said to me, I can't see around corners, but God, I can't see around corners, but God can. Thank God we can't see around the corners, so we don't know what's coming. About the attachment style of caregiver, and we're able to speak a bit more about attachment style caregiver and grief. Before Mum died, yes. Well, the attachment style being the secure, we're going to navigate grief a little bit more, a bit easier. The disorganised attachment is going to be all over the place. Anxious attachment, ambivalent attachment, those other styles of attachment never set us up to be able to come into here. And that's what I'm talking about. When we're in here, when we're feeling in here, and we've had secure attachment, we'll navigate this more easily. Otherwise, you know as well as I do, Diana, we are defending. We are not going there. We are protecting ourselves, and we're staying up here. And this is not helpful. If we have to stay up there for a little while, that's fine. But be very aware of what you're doing and reach out for the help. It helps to know we grow around it, and when it feels like it will never shift. That's right. I do believe that, Heath. I do believe that there's a point at which the grief doesn't leave us, but we grow around it. That's a very way. Yeah. Good, thank you. I'm just quickly running through. Justin, my dad passed away 3 years ago and a best friend died 2 years ago. I still struggle that they just aren't here anymore. Yes, I feel they're still with me. It's just a feeling I have. Justin, I think they do stay with us. Thank you, Sue. You said, yes, I did say that. Grief lives you out, you don't live it out. It takes on a life of its own. Before I went into grief, I used to think, well, if I just do do what I'm supposed to do, then it'll move faster. It didn't move faster at all. I'm conscious of time. Can I talk a lot? Loss of home, work, social, I suppose I deal with it. Okay, Amy, there are many things that we lose. Work, yes. Home, of course, that can happen in, through financial difficulties or through divorce or separation. Social network, yes, again, with the change in nature of relationship. It's very difficult without family support and without friendship support around us. And it's very important that we try and navigate that and start letting people know that we're not doing it easy, because people will help. In my world, anyway, there are very few people that wouldn't say, let me support you, let me help you. How to deal with grief in recovery, bipolar, Diana, wow, plus ADHD, and I'm really struggling. Liesl, get help. You're dealing with a lot of things there, bipolar, ADHD, and grief. You need someone to help you navigate slowly. I'm getting wound up here at the side. And I just want this drama triangle, yes, in the middle of everything. And I think yoga is very good. I think anything that helps, meditation if you can do it, taking some time out and being with people who understand you. Do not go to an empty well. Do not go to people who don't understand grief, and do not try and talk to them about it, because they won't understand, and you'll walk away thinking you're crazy and that you should be better. And it's not how it is. So, grieving is the way that loss can heal. Let me say that again. Grieving is the way that loss can heal. We need to trust our bodies. We need to take a moment to try and allow ourselves to grieve in whatever way is important for us. Grieving is not about forgetting. Disappointment and loss are part of our everyday life. And many times we can put some things behind us, and other times we are unable to do that, and that's okay. It's actually okay. If you grieve someone, think about this for a minute. I'm going to finish on this. If you grieve someone, if you feel like your heart's going to break because of the loss of someone, I want you to actually acknowledge that you have a capacity, a deep capacity to love. That's the price that we pay for loving people. And whilst that's not of any, it may not be helpful for you right now, but I want you to understand that grief doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's because we've loved deeply, because we've allowed ourselves to be vulnerable with someone, because we've, leaned in, I'm always talking about leaning into the relationship. Because we've done that, the loss is deep and we will actually feel that loss. We can recover from loss in all its perplexities and all its complexities. We can actually take time to grieve as well. So, get your journals out, get your paintbrushes out, get your drawing out, get your charcoal out, get in the garden, do whatever you've got to do. Do something that's different to help you navigate your way through the grief. It is painful and it will pass and you will grow around it. Of that I am sure. I want to thank you for being with us tonight and thank you for those wonderful comments. They are just inspiring to me. I'm very humbled by being able to offer this to you tonight and I hope it's been very helpful. I'm sure I've missed something. It's a very big topic, but what I do know is that I'm very grateful that I personally, with you, don't do this by myself. So take care of yourselves, go gently. Don't forget about the blog on the South Pacific website, Understanding and Processing Grief. And if you need help, please reach out to the intake team tomorrow and get the help you need. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. Thanks, Patricia, for all your comments. And thank you everybody else who's made a contribution tonight. It's very lovely to hear from you. Go gently, take care, and thank you very much.